Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another episode of the strategy series. Today we're talking about 5 ways you can make your deck better, and I think this is a very important topic to talk about as we go into nationals. Hopefully it helps you guys with your deck building process. We will get into it, but firstly I want to give you guys my plan for nationals. So I'm actually leaving my house in New Jersey a week ahead of time to go to California. I have some other trips planned kind of like on the way. So basically what I'm trying to do is pre-record a lot of videos to release during that week, the week leading up to nationals. So basically what I want you to do is I want you to comment down below any video requests you have, because one, it'll help me make the content you guys want to see, and I'll be able to just upload that throughout the week while I'm in California the week leading up to Nats. So I had those videos ready for you guys. So let me know in the comments below. Anyways, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe, and if you guys want to help support the channel, there are many ways to do so down in the description. But if you're looking for custom sleeves, playmats, deck boxes, any TCG accessories like that, check out the link in the description below to yourplaymat.com. That link will get you 10% off your order there. Their stuff is super high quality, guys. 110% recommend it. Anyway, let's get into the video with the first tip. Number 1, bring your deck closer to 50 cards. Recently, I guess over the past like year and a half, the rule for Dragon Ball Super in terms of deck size changed, and now you can play anywhere from 50 to 60 cards in your main deck. It used to just be you could only play 50, no more, no less. But just because the rule changed where you can play 60 does not mean that you should. Now, this is a kind of a soft rule. Like, you should be as close to 50 as possible, but it's definitely going to depend on the deck as to whether or not you want to be at 53 cards, 52 cards. 60 cards I don't think is ever really a great reason to do that, but like when Vegex was at full power, I definitely like 55 cards in Vegex, because you know you're milling 5, it's pretty likely you're going to be overwhelming a bit, so you want to make sure you can manage your sparking 20 effect pretty easily. I also like 55 in Gogeta Xeno, because again you're warping 5 cards when you need to, so you want to make sure you're not going to deck out, and Gogeta Xeno can't really replenish his deck, so that makes a little bit more sense there. 50 cards, I like being at 50 when I'm playing like an aggro deck that's going to end the game within the first 3-4 turns, because you know you're not really too worried about decking out, because you're looking to end the game early. You're not looking for this sort of dragged out game. But a mid-range deck like a Soul Striker or an Icarus or a Kaba, I kind of like 52 cards, because you are playing a bit of a slower game, and if you happen to come across mill, you want to have a little bit extra protection for that. And besides that, like even against a mid-range mirror, especially if you're playing something like Icarus or even Soul Striker, the odds of decking out increase a lot, because you're going to be drawing a lot of cards, resolving Sand Instincts, just going back and forth with your opponent. It's kind of likely that you can deck out, so you kind of want to be a little more liberal with the cards in your deck, right? So what I have here are 2 different scans of a hyper geometric calculator. We've used this a handful of times on the channel, so I always like to explain it when when people are seeing it for the first time. So basically what you do is you input your population size, and that's the size of your deck. So I have one measurement for 50 cards and one for 53 cards. Number of successes in the population, that's just a playset. We'll assume it's a playset of a card, so 4 copies. Sample size, your first 6 cards in your opening hand. Now keep in mind, this doesn't really take into account your mulligan. That makes the math a lot more complex. So this is basically going to be the percentage of what you'll see in your first 6 draws, and then your odds improve depending on how you mulligan, right? So if you mulligan and keep 2 cards, your deck is smaller, therefore the card you want to draw is it's more likely that you'll draw it, right? So that's kind of how that works. Number of successes in the population is 1. So basically we want to see in a 50 versus a 53 card deck, what are our odds of drawing 1 copy of a 4 of in our 6 card opening hand? So the probability of X equaling 1 for 50 cards is about 34%. You can round it up to 35%. So you have a 35% chance of opening a 4 of that you want to see on turn 1, as where if you played a 53 card deck, the odds are 33% where you would see that card that you want to see. So you notice that your odds go down about 1.5% if you're playing a 53 card deck versus a 50 card deck. Now that sounds very minimal, but it definitely can make a difference over the course of a long tournament, especially when you consider nationals probably going to be anywhere from 7 to 8 rounds. And in those types of scenarios, consistency usually wins. We talk about this a lot, where consistency versus power is kind of how you want to gauge your deck that you're playing. Consistency usually wins out. If your deck has like an auto win combo, but you can only pull it off 1 out of 10 games, it's definitely not worth playing that deck. You got to play something more consistent that still has a pretty decent power level. So if you're really relying on a turn 1 card, that's where I would definitely say play 50 cards. Probably don't want to play any more than that, because you want to maximize your consistency and your odds of seeing that turn 1 card. But if you're playing a deck like Soul Striker or Icarus, where your turn 1's not really that important, what's more important is just like the mid game, then I think you can get away with 52, 53 cards. I think that's much more realistic. So yeah, in my opinion, that's how you want to gauge how many cards you should play in your deck. Be closer to 50 if you rely on a turn 1 play or playing an aggro deck. Maybe like 52, 53 if you're playing a mid-range deck, and then like, 55 if you're playing a hyper mill deck like old Vegex or Gogeta Xeno. Even Gogeta Xeno though, you can play like 52 if you want to be more consistent. You gotta be a little careful with your warp effect. But anyways, let's move on to tip number 2. Stop playing super niche tech cards. There are cards that people play because they're cool, they have flashy effects, maybe they come up once in a blue moon. One of the main examples that I have for this is Absolute Confidence. Activate main/battle, choose one. Either choose up to one of your opponent's battle cards with an energy cost of 3 or less, return it to the owner's hand and draw a card, or choose one of your opponent's unison cards and remove a marker from it. That second effect is where most people use this, because it can technically stop a unison from killing you if it's a double strike or triple strike unison. Basically, you take a marker off of it, and then all of its skills and power bonuses reset back to whatever they were originally. And that's not bad, but this is not a card that's main deckable, right? Like, there are just not enough strategies in the format that win the game via unisons for you to justify main decking this card. So any card that's in your main deck, I want you to look at it, and if it's not like a super integral key piece of the deck, like it's not an engine piece, or it's not a super combo, or it's not a counter attack, I want you to look at it and really evaluate, is this card like not coming up as much as I would like it to? Is this card way too niche? You really want to consider that when you're deciding to main deck a card. Like Absolute Confidence, I would never recommend maining it, possibly sideboarding it, but even then the format just doesn't have that many decks like Set 10 Vegito, King Cold. These decks are just not popular enough to where they're winning with unisons that you should be maining Absolute Confidence. Side decking it is a possibility, but yeah, you got to stop, you got to avoid playing these super niche cards, especially if they're way too gimmicky, way too flashy, and they aren't consistent enough in what you need them to do. Next up is kind of an opposite type of tip. Look at the meta for tech cards in your deck, right? So black decks, especially like, Dark Broly, Vegex back in previous formats when they were very popular, Super Kamehameha was like a niche sideboard card. Some lists would side it, some lists wouldn't, but more recently we're seeing pretty much every single Gogeta Xeno deck main 2 copies of Super Kamehameha, and that is a meta tech, right? Because you have cards like Mecha Freezer, Robotic Riposte being very popular. You have cards like Oceanus in black being very popular. So you have these different like floodgate negates that black decks like Gogeta Xeno want to stop. That's why they're maining Super Kamehameha. So it's pretty much the exact opposite of Absolute Confidence, where these decks have a very good reason to be maining Super Kamehameha. It's not a vital engine piece, it's not integral to the deck, but it is important for the deck to succeed, because you got to be able to push through cards, again, like Robotic Riposte, Oceanus, stuff like that. So you got to evaluate the meta, and if you need to tech a card, you really want it to fit an important role within that meta, like Super Kamehameha does. Now we're talking about side deck a bit. So identify your bad matchups. This can again go back to the Super Kamehameha argument, where you just really have a hard time against floodgates, so you need a way to stop them. But this now we'll talk more about sideboard. So identifying your bad matchups. Let's say you're playing Soul Striker or even maybe Kava. So you're playing blue, right? What does blue do? Blue untaps a lot of energy, and blue is really reliant on Baby Hatch and Dimension Magic, 2 really powerful negates in the color, amongst other negates, right? Maybe Heroic Prospect, stuff like that. So Gogeta Xeno, for example, can give you a really hard time, because both their 1-drops, both the True Fighting Spirits, punish you for counterattacking and untapping energy. And one of your main cards, Dimension Magic, does both of those things, right? So you got to have a way to deal with those 1-drops in your different types of blue decks, right? So that's why a lot of blue decks sideboard Piccolo, Gohan, Skill, Sharpen. Basically for 1 blue, you get to bottom deck 2 battle cards, 3 costs or less. So it's a good way to deal with those cards. Now, most blue decks don't main this card, they just sideboard it for Gogeta Xeno, but the reason they're doing that is because it's a bad matchup. It can be really tough to beat if those 1-drops get to stick around on the board for free, right? So you really want to dedicate a lot of your sideboard to bad matchups and popular matchups, right? Like if you're playing a deck that already beats another deck, you don't really need to sideboard cards for that strategy, right? Unless it's going to be like super popular most of the field, and you might want to dedicate 2 to 3 cards in your sideboard for it. But you really want to make sure that you know what your bad matchups are through testing, and you want to make sure that you have the appropriate sideboard for that. Sometimes I would advise main deck teching for your bad matchup, but only if it's expected to be like a majority of the field. Like if you expect Gogeta Xeno to be the #1 deck, maybe you would consider main decking Gohan Piccolo with skill sharpened. So you really need to know your bad matchups, need to know how you can beat them, because nowadays, like, I really wouldn't say there are a lot of auto loss matchups in the format. There are a handful here and there, but the card pool is so vast now that you can probably go through it and find something that'll help you beat your bad matchup, right? So it's all about going through the card database, finding those cards, figuring out how to fit them in your sideboard, coming up with a sideboarding plan, knowing what to take out, knowing what to put in. It can be really helpful to write that stuff down too. Literally write a chart of, in this matchup, these cards come out of my main deck, these cards go into my main deck from my sideboard. So that can be really helpful. And the final tip, guys, test sideboarded games. Let me tell you, like, just this past year, I really started doing this, like, at least online. Like, I used to live in an area where I had locals and had friends to play with more constantly, so we would play sideboarded games. But since I moved back home, I don't really have a locals, and a lot of my testing partners and friends and teammates are in other states, so we're playing a lot online. And I'll tell you what, I'm very guilty of this myself, not testing sideboarded games and going into events just like having a sideboard theory and hoping it works, right? Going into nationals this time, I'm not really doing that. I'm trying to make sure I'm as prepared as possible. So I want to make sure you guys are as prepared as possible as well. Make sure you're testing sideboarded games, whether you're playing online or in person. Just make another copy of the deck with the sideboard changes you think could work. Test that matchup. I promise you'll be very, very happy that you did it. You don't want to go into an event just having a sideboard plan and hoping it works, because one of the biggest problems that I think leads to people's failures at event, and I'm saying failures, like, you might still top, but if you wanted to get further into the tournament, your sideboard actually mattering is a huge thing there. How often do you guys see deck profiles where people go through their sideboard and they're like, this card wasn't as relevant as I thought it would be, or this card wasn't as good as I thought it would be? You want to make sure your sideboard cards are very, very impactful and important. So hopefully, guys, these 5 tips help you with your deck building going into nationals. Again, leave comments down below with videos that you want to see going into this next week and a half. So with that being said, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.